Hello everybody, it's Mike here at GameFromScratch, announcing a new tutorial series of sorts here on GameFromScratch and over on DevGame. I'm going to be doing a video and text-based series, and when I say new of sorts, there's a reason behind that. Is I've kind of already started this series before, but I branded it poorly, I didn't run with it, I wasn't as consistent with it as I wanted to be. And what this is the Game Engine Hello World series, and specifically it's 3D game engines. And what I'm basically doing is implementing the least minimal, functional, demonstrative program I can think of in various different game engines. That way you can, as quickly as possible, kind of compare the workflow between the engines. And truth of the matter is, there's a project I implement every time I evaluate a new game engine. And that is basically a very, very simple bowling game. And that's what I'm doing. I'm basically going through with each different game engine, and I'm implementing the same basic game in that engine. And on top of that, I'm going to go on DevGame and do a step-by-step text-based version of the same thing. So as you can see here in front of you, one of the first ones I'm going to start with is Zenko. Now here is Zenko running, and here is basically part of the game I will implement. What I'm going to implement is basically a title screen with some background music playing. You can transition out and then you get into this bowling game like so. You've got a lane, you've got pins, you've got a bowling ball, you've got physics, and you've got basic scripting controlling it all. So you see if I go here and run this particular game, boom, boom, boom. I'll give this a second while it compiles. Basically, you're going to see it starts with a title screen with some background music. In this case, it's actually going to start with their initial screen. But this shows you a number of things. We'll go through them in a second. Let Zenko finish compiling. Now, I started with Zenko because Zenko 3.0 was just recently released. And so, as is my way of, familiarizing myself with the engine, I went through and implemented my consistent bowling game. So here's your title screen. I'll probably change out the music because that's really bad. But basically, you come in, you click, and then there is your bowling ball in the world. You hit some kind of a key to control it. It's got physics, it interacts with the world, and that's about it. Now, obviously, there is a whole lot more polish you can put on a bowling game, but then it actually just adds a complication without really introducing anything new. So, in addition to the Zenko game engine, I've also implemented it, or am in the process of implementing it, in Unreal Engine. Now, you're going to notice something a little bit different here. Specifically, the bowling ball doesn't show up. And that's because Unreal Engine does things slightly different. In that case, I will highlight that. The Unreal Engine, for example, the bowling ball is implemented as our main game pawn right here. So that's actually represented by this little controller. So here you can see our actual bowling ball. The model is available here. Here is the logic that ultimately controls the bowling ball. In this case, I used blueprints to demonstrate it, and the actual language I use to implement it is probably going to be based around the most popular language of choice. It was a bit of a toss-up for Unreal Engine. It could have been blueprints or it could have been C++, but I figured for kind of an introduction to a programming language kind of approach, I should probably go with blueprints in that case. So that is the basic idea of the series, and where this should be useful to you is if you're trying to evaluate engines, this will give you an idea of what the workflow is like. Now, by no means can you use this to judge things like benchmarking or performance. I am not showing you best practices by any means. I don't use each engine enough to be one person to actually showcase best practice, but I will do some research and Googling before I really jump in to make sure that I am actually showcasing decent practices, I suppose would be the best way to put it. Or if I do actually implement bad practices, that should be a little bit illustrative to you about the game engine, that it kind of leads you down that road. It's sort of like how in the early days of Unity engine, you used to do a lot of things with magic string commands. And if I implement things that way, well, that's an ugly way of doing things, and it should set off a bit of a red flag for you. And in that case, actually, on the topic of Unity, as I mentioned early on, this is actually a series I started with, and I called it Bowling With, and then the game engine name. I did 3 of them. I did one on Godot 2.1. I did one on Unity 2017, perhaps. And I also did one on Play Canvas. And you see, I'll actually link these down below. There's 3-part tutorials kind of show you what I'm going to go about doing here, but I'm going to actually streamline it a little bit more to try and keep the videos to, say, the 20-25 minutes at the peak kind of range. And again, I'm going to re-implement all the tech stuff over on DevGame. I'll throw those links up as they come available. So as you saw, the Zenko's code has already been written. I've also done the code in a number of other languages or engines. In fact, once again, this is my default starter project when I am first learning an engine myself, because I know the assets I have work. I have the original sources. Of course, I'll make all those available as part of this as well. But as you can see here, I've done it in Godot 2 and I've done it in Unity, and I intend to actually revisit both of those under the new format. But now let's go through a little bit of exactly what this simple-ass game actually demonstrates and why this should be useful. So at a very minimum, I'm going to be creating a game. Now, that one's kind of a no-brainer, but create a new project. So I can show you what the project creation process is like. I'll be creating a scene, obviously. In fact, generally, depending on the type of game engine, I'll be creating 2 scenes, one for the title and then one for the game itself. But obviously, this is something you're going to have to do in any and all 3D game engines. I will also be showing you how to import a 3D textured object. I have bowling pins, bowling lanes, if needed, if there is no spherical primitive. The bowling ball as well. I have those available in DAE, FBX, and blend format. They've also got normal maps and texture maps on the bowling lane, so you can see what the full-blown workflow is like. And in some cases, you know, it all just comes in and works great. Sometimes there's a little bit of extra work involved in bringing your assets in. But the nice thing is you will see the workflow of bringing assets into an individual game engine. On top of that, we also see how to handle basic input. Sometimes this is actually not as easy as you think. Sometimes you actually have to set up an input map before you can work with any of this. Sometimes it's very, very simple. But normally all we're going to really be showing is responding to mouse press or key press to launch our bowling ball. But, you know, you can extrapolate that out. Once you know how to handle one key or one mouse, you know how to handle all of the mouse buttons and all the keys for the most part. So again, that's why I'm trying to keep it very clean, very simple. Next up, you're also obviously going to see how to script logic. Again, not a ton of logic going on. Most games engines don't handle it automatically, so what you're looking at is logic to handle your input, logic to apply a physical impulse or force to the bowling ball, logic on collision to play the sound effect when the bowling collision occurs, and that's about it. But you, again, are going to see the different points in the game's life cycle and how you would do things like handle playing sound, how to play input, etc. I'm kind of jumping all over one of my next points. Next up, we're obviously going to see how to instance objects within the scenes. Like you just saw with the Unreal Engine example, you create your main character or bowling ball as an actor. At least that's one way of doing it. Whereas in other game engines, it's a much different process. Now, they're all kind of starting to be very, very similar. But the cool thing about this is you are going to see how to actually create a bowling lane, a bowling pin, and a main character / bowling ball in the game world. So it shows you the various different ways to instantiate objects that you've imported. Also going to look, obviously, at basic physics. At the very minimum, you generally have a static body with the bowling lane, and then 2 rigid bodies in the form of the bowling ball and the bowling pins. Additionally, sometimes we may look at prefabbing, so if it's possible to create one pin, create a prefab, and then instance all the other pins out of that prefab, we'll look at that functionality as well. Obviously, we'll look at handling collisions. So what we do is when the ball hits the pins, it causes the pin noise to play. So you can actually see some actual code behind the physics when something occurs. Again, we're not getting into a huge amount of complexity, but that's the point of this. We're showing you the bare minimum features of making a game without anything else, to be honest. We're showing you, breaking it down to the mere essence of functionality in a game. And like I said, this is the workflow I go through to teach myself the basics of learning a new game. And we do cover probably 75 to 80% of what you need to know in most basic or simple games. Now, there's things we don't get into. Animated meshes definitely is an area we could probably look at in the future, but not something I intend to cover in this series. We also saw, again, I mentioned this earlier on, playing audio and music. So first off, we're going to play some kind of a background music when the first screen is shown, and then we will play an audio file when the bowling ball hits the bowling pin. So you can see how to deal with the 2 kinds of audio if they're separate. A lot of times it's the exact same process to play background music and sound effects, but if it's separate, this is a chance to showcase both actions. And we're going to show how to display a title screen of some form. And switching scenes, possibly this might not be the case. So basically, we're going to have a title screen scene and a switch into the main game. But this could also boil down to, it could be showing a HUD that works as a title screen and then transitioning to the main game. It's kind of going to be implementation specific based on the game engine we're dealing with. Now, what game engines are we looking at covering here? Well, initially, Zenko, because I've already done all the work. Unreal Engine 4, because, well, I've already done all the work. I'm going to revisit Unity. Like I said, I've already done the one video on Unity. I will link the text version of that down below. But a lot has changed since I did that, and I want to try to make the exact same game in every system. So I'm going to revisit that. So the game that I spit out of Zenko is going to be the same as the game I spit out of Unity. I'm also going to look at using the most current version of Unity, and I may consider, I'm not committing to this, but I may try to do it as an ECS project to make it, a little bit more interesting. Also, I'm going to revisit with Godot 3. Now, the previous version of this I did was Godot 2 point something, 2.1 maybe, and there's been a huge amount of development on the 3D side of things. Now, we're not going to be using a whole lot of that stuff, but it will be interesting to see. And in fact, I may tweak this slightly to also show some dynamic light somehow, because that's one of those things that I should showcase in all of the different game engines. But there will be a Godot 3.1. Another one I'm looking at right now is using the newest version of CryEngine. That's CryEngine 5.5 Beta 6 I'm playing around with currently, so whatever is going to be the most current at the time. Hopefully I'll look at that, and on the topic of CryEngine, I may revisit Lumberyard as well. Like, I know there's a lot of people looking for starter projects for both of those different game engines, so like I said, I may visit them as part of this series. And that is my initial go-to list, but obviously you guys can really help me decide here. If there is a game engine that is not on this list that you would like to see get the Hello World treatment, let me know. Also, before I commit too far into this, so I'm probably not going to start publishing these until, I'll probably have it week to 2 weeks to get the Zenko one out at probably the latest. Again, it's summer ending. I kind of want to get back into September where I have a lot more time available and I can really focus on this and the Godot book and other stuff. But it is definitely, I'm working on all of the projects in parallel. So if there's some certain functionality you think that should be part of a minimum Hello World example, do let me know and I'll see if I can work it in. Now, obviously, any game engine you recommend to me to cover in this also needs to support all of this functionality. So basically, it has to have rigid body support, music playback support of some form, the ability to import 3D assets. It should be pretty much all game engines, but I found a few that don't have the requisite amount of rigid body, static body support, for example, from the physics side of things. But if there is another game engine and I do have access to it, let me know and I will definitely consider covering it in this series, because it's one of those things I want to kind of be as comprehensive as possible. Now, the same thing goes for 2D game engines. I'd actually like to try to come up with a 2D Hello World equivalent. You know, it's something that showcases most of the functionality of a 2D engine. So, you know, again, physics, potentially lighting, input handling, graphics drawing, collisions, that kind of stuff, all in one game. And I know a really common example is Flappy Bird, but I don't want to implement Flappy Bird over and over and over again. But if any of you guys have a good suggestion for a game you'd like to see me implement, you know, across the board in, you know, say Game Maker or Construct 2, Godot using 2D, Unity using 2D, etc., do let me know, and I will also consider doing a similar series to this in 2D. Also, if this sounds like a completely asinine and stupid idea, let me know that as well, and I won't waste my time on it. But I think there's actually a lot of value in basically showcasing a minimum functional working set project with each game engine, even if it's not masterfully done, which I promise you it won't be. But this, again, is the process I take internally. I learned so many bloody engines that you know, you can just get in and play around and plink away at icons and such and try to learn it via osmosis, but it rarely works. So a lot of times it's nice to just jump in and say, okay, here's what I'm going to implement. So normally this is my starting point. So I do this anyways. So that's why I'm going to turn this ultimately into a series. So once again, that is the Game Engine Hello World series. If there's a particular game engine or game feature that I can cover across engines, please do let me know in the comments down below if there's an engine you want to see covered, a feature you want to see covered, or if you think I'm an idiot, let me know down below. All right, that's it for now. Talk to you all later. Goodbye.